call, and at some point, hopefully the chair will arrive. I know she's stuck in traffic, and we want to honor everybody's time, so we'll get started. So, roll call, please.
Teresa Taylor. David Miller.
Here.
Margaret Brown.
Here.
Henry Jones. Here. Matthew Saha for Fiona Ma. Jason Perez. Here. Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Okay, the first order of business is the approval of the September 17th, 2019 Finance and Administration Committee timed agenda.
Second.
Moved by Jones, seconded by Brown. Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Well, executive report, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Michael Cohen with CalPERS. Just a couple things to note this morning. First of all, we did have a revision to item 5D, which is the annual contract and procurement report. There's copies in your materials as well as the back of the room and on the website. And then the second item, some good news. You'll recall on July 1st, we opened up the pension pre-funding trust fund for our member agencies to begin depositing funds. I'm happy to report that we have our first contract and first deposit from the Midway City Sanitation District. So that's very exciting news. We're looking forward to additional local governments joining the trust in the coming months. So with that, I think I can turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Item number 4, action consent items. Back to you, Mr. Cohen. Approval of the May 14th, 2019 Finance and Administration meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Moved by Brown, seconded by Paquin. I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions? Motion carries. So we're on to number 5. Again, this one's to Mr. Cohen. Information consent items, starting with our annual calendar review.
So unless one of the members has a question about the consent items.
Any consent items to pull? Okay, we'll move along to the action agenda items. Okay, proposed regulations for Social Security Administration fees, and it looks like Renee Ostrander. Welcome, Ms. Ostrander.
Good morning. Renee Ostrander, a CalPERS team member. So I'm here today to present to you agenda item 6A. It's the proposed regulations for the administration of Social Security. The state's required by the federal government to have a designated state Social Security administrator to act as a liaison to the federal government on behalf of public entities. However, no funding is provided for that purpose. In 1955, the governor's office designated CalPERS to serve in this capacity. The cost of administering the program was previously covered from the interest earned by the Social Security and Medicare tax holding account. The fund is nearly depleted and can no longer pay the program's administrative costs. CalPERS cannot use retirement funds to cover the cost of administering the program. CalPERS is authorized in the Public Employees Retirement Law to collect fees to cover the cost of administering the program. Within these draft regulations, there are 2 types of fees that are now being charged: an annual administrative fee and a one-time fee for any new agreements or modifications. The annual fee will be charged to all agencies that have voluntary coverage, which is a Section 218 agreement in place with the Social Security Administration. The annual fee is based on a total number of persons employed at the agency. The range is from $200 a year to $2,500 a year. The fees began with the 1920 fiscal year. The purpose of these regulations is to document the administration of these Social Security fees, including the fee structure, data hierarchy, calculation of fees, etc. With the approval of this agenda item, we will move the the draft regulation text forward to the Office of Administrative Law. They'll release it for a 45-day comment period. At the end of that 45-day comment period, we'll bring back any comments that we receive, any other changes that are required, and bring it forward for your approval. That completes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Ms.
Does that
Ostra.
work? Oh, hang on. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Anyways, I had a question about the establishment of the fee. Typically, as a governmental agency, you must have a nexus in order to collect a fee. And I see that it says in here that you ran this through the California Department of Finance.
That's correct.
For the fee structure methodology.
That's correct.
It'd be lovely for those of us who like to look at that analysis to make that as an attachment, because we're essentially going to be approving a fee, and I really don't want to be doing that. So I would like to just see the report that shows the nexus between the cost that we're going to be charging these agencies and the amount we're charging. So if maybe you can either send that to me by separate cover, or if everybody wants to take a look at that. I assume it's some sort of report that shows the analysis?
Yes, we do have some information based on, it's actually a 9-tiered fee structure. So we aligned with the department, the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, and they use that same 9-tier fee structure, and we set it up for that, so we can provide additional information.
We'd just like to see that fee structure methodology before we, at least before we make a final. Right now, this is just a proposed regulation, correct?
Correct. This is just proposed and going out for public comment for the 45-day period, so it will come back after the 45-day comment period's
So,
ended.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy if it's just me, or if anybody else on the board can't sleep and wants to read that, anybody else could have it as well.
Fine.
Ms.
Yeah.
Brown, we will provide it to the full board.
Great, thanks.
Okay, nothing else on this item. So
Move
I guess
approval? We need,
Okay, so we got motions here. We have a move, second by Mr. Perez. So I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions? The ayes have it. So moving on, item 7, information agenda items. 7A, annual actuarial valuation terminated agency pool. Mr. Taranto and Ms. Robinson. Oh, Mr. Robinson, sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Scott Trando from the Actuarial Office. Item 7A is an information item and presents the annual actuarial valuation report for the 6/30/2018 terminated agency pool. The terminated agency pool, or TAP as we like to call it, exists to provide those benefit payments for those members who were credited with service and later on the agencies terminate from CalPERS. The agencies in the TAP program don't pay regular contributions into the fund. Instead, when each plan terminates, the plan's required to have a fully funded status before we move it into the TAP pool. In those cases where a plan may be overfunded, there'll be a refund issued to the employer, and in cases where a plan is underfunded, we collect the difference between what's owed at the time of termination. At this point, I'm going to pass along to Julian, who will provide more details about this year's valuation.
Thank you, Scott. I'm Julian Robinson, CalPERS staff. I'm happy to present the results of the terminated agency risk pool. We do this valuation on an annual basis and present the results to the board to update them on the financial status of the pool. As of June 30, 2018, there were 109 plans in the terminated agency pool. The funded ratio of the TAP is 197.4%, close to 200%. There have been a number of small changes since the last valuation. There was the addition of one agency, the Glen Ellen Fire Protection District, which added approximately $500,000 of assets and liabilities to the pool. We changed the valuation assumptions on a yearly basis. The methodology is described in our actual report. We use the 30-year strips rate to determine the discount rate to value the liabilities. And the inflation rate also changes from year to year also based on this rate. As with all the other plans that CalPERS handles, we did apply the new methodology and valuation system to the plans in the TAP, and that has had an effect on the liabilities. The value of the assets in the fund as of June 30, 2018 is $286 million. The accrued liability is $145 million. As you can see, the assets exceed the liabilities, and that's why we have a funded status of close to 200%. The assets in the TAP are invested in an interesting way. The assets are split into two segments. There's an immunized segment and a surplus segment. The immunized segment is handled by the investment office, and they set up a fund of bonds which cash match the expected benefit payments into the future. So they buy a portfolio of bonds. The payments from the maturities and the coupons on the bond are expected to match the benefit payments for the TAP out into the future. The investment office presents this information on an annual basis as they rebalance the TAP as new plans enter and leave the TAP each year. The actual office provides fresh cash flows to the investment office, which they use for their analysis to rebalance the TAP, the immunized segment in the portfolio. Any surplus beyond those assets which are required for the immunized segment are called the surplus segment, and that's invested with the rest of the assets in the PERF. And the rate of return that we achieved last year for the TAP overall was 5.1%. We expect this to be a lower rate because the immunized segment, given that it's invested essentially in government bonds, has a lower rate of interest attached to it, and we do that because of the security of the cash matching which we have to do for the TAP. As the Chief Actuary explained, once an agency goes into the TAP, we can no longer reach out to them for any further contributions. So essentially, this is a unique aspect to the TAP that CalPERS, so to speak, is on the hook for all the liabilities and to pay all the benefits, unlike other plans where future contributions can come from outside agencies. And therefore, a conservative investment approach, the immunized segment has been established to take on that risk appropriately. We conduct a number of sensitivity analysis, both with this plan and all the other plans and pools in the system. We look at the risk of mortality. That's probably the most significant risk associated with this pool. If people live longer or if people live shorter. So we run an assessment based on a 10% improvement in mortality and a 10% increase in mortality. And as you can see, the results, approximately 6% up and down would be the impact of a 10% change in the mortality rate. We similarly conduct an inflation impact analysis to see what would happen if the inflation rate we assume in the valuation is increased by 1% or decreased by 1%. As you can see, the impact here on the liability with a lower rate of inflation would lower the liabilities by about $16 million. If with a higher inflation, we would have an increase of about $6 million. That completes my presentation of the financial status of the TAP. We're happy to answer any questions which you may have.
Okay, we have several questions. I'll start with Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I was actually looking at agenda item 7A, page attachment 1, page 14, where we show the funded ratio going down every year since 2015. And I'm wondering, is that because we have more people coming into the pool and there's less funds? Or I'm just trying to figure out why it's going down and what is our sort of minimum threshold that we won't fall below.
Well, the answer is there are additional agencies which are entering the pool. As you can see in the accrued liability column, those liabilities have been increasing over the same period, and that's as new agencies come into the pool. Also, the discount rate changes from year to year, so that will also impact the liabilities and therefore the funded status. When we do evaluation, when an agency terminates, we add a 5% load onto the liabilities as a contingency factor. So in the long run, if the TAP continues to grow, then that would kind of be the ultimate percentage that we would expect in the long run, because the addition of another agency into the pool will effectively reduce the funded status each time. So the amount of surplus in dollar amount may remain the same, but as a percentage of the whole pool will become smaller.
So I saw that like the discount rate increased, right, from 2 point something to 2.99, right? And then
right, yeah,
there was another calculation you did that there was two calculations that changed that. So did we approve that discount rate change like we do for the PERF, or no? Do you guys do that on your own?
Well, the board has approved the policy in the way we establish what the discount rate is. So we follow the policy. So if the board wanted to change the policy, and that would impact the change in the discount rate, but that's why it moves each year, because the rates that we use are based on the market yields at the valuation date.
Great. So we did not act and change the discount rate. You followed the policy and changed the rate.
That's right.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say I didn't know that we had changed the discount rate, so I didn't know if I was not paying attention or not. And then I know Mr. Trendo and you and I have talked about how we recalculate the pool, or is it possible to recalculate the pool, especially for some of the people that are receiving less than their pension amount. And so I'm just wondering sort of what our process or procedure is for that. Maybe every couple of years do we take a look, or is it every year we take a look at the mortality rates and things like that? I'm just trying to figure out how we can get some of the people who've received steep discounts in their retirement because they're in the TAP, how we can get them more of their pension. Specifically East San Gabriel, but I'm sure it's more than them that
Right.
have a discount.
Right. I understand that we like in East San Gabriel, their benefits were decreased going into the TAP. The thing we have to keep in mind is those assets in the TAP were designed to fund and provide a cushion, a safety margin for those members that are in the TAP. And it wasn't designed to provide additional benefits for members coming in and to kind of buffer that decrease. It'd be akin to just taking assets from current other employers. You can think about it from the point of, when plans terminate, we true them up when they go in, and so you would be creating a precedence where you're taking money away from those plans that, as they paid their fair share to get into the TAP, to make up for plans that are a little bit short going in.
Can you tell me how many plans went in short, but basically got, of the 109, was there 109 plans in the TAP? Is that what I heard you say?
That's right. To my knowledge, besides East San Gabriel and Loyalton,
and then there were about, I think, additional 2 more plans. I want to say there's about 4 plans that went in within the last 3 to 4 years. And then if you go back several years, there were some sporadic plans that went in a little bit underfunded before that.
And so what is the minimum funded ratio we need to keep the TAP at?
Like the target of the whole system is to be 100% funded. So with the TAP, because of our additional contingency load, would ultimately be 105% because of that additional buffer. So that's the target. I mean, it will take quite a long time to get there. But just to put things in perspective, the total assets of the plan, it's about $300 million. So that's if you look at it compared to the whole system, that's less than 0.1% of the whole system. So we're talking about a relatively small, unique pool. And the fluctuations in the entire portfolio probably exceed the total value of the assets in the pool.
And I did want to congratulate staff on getting 8.6 on the excess. That was very, very nice and helped that pool. And I know it won't always happen, but it was a nice return, and that does help the pool as well. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Perez.
All right. I'm thoroughly confused. Shocker, I know. The funded status is that not the 201.5%? I'm sorry, for the 18 is 197.4?
That's right, yes.
Okay, and you said we need to be at 100%.
Right. Over the years, the surplus has emerged. Unlike other plans in the system where there were benefit improvements which ate away at the surplus, that didn't happen in the TAP. So as a result of that, and the investment performance, we're in a relatively comfortable spot with respect to the TAP. But as I mentioned, the relative liabilities are small. If there was a significant bankruptcy of a city and they would have to be moved into the TAP, that could very easily wipe out a large proportion of that surplus, even though the 140 million amount would remain the same. But if that 140 million was now part of a $1.4 billion fund, it would have a significantly lower funded status.
Okay. The members in the TAP, do they get COLAs? They
do get COLAs because that's part of the contractual agreement that the benefits were based on. Most of the plans in the TAP have a 2% COLA.
Thank you. And then roughly, how many members? There's 190 little TAPs, but how many members all told?
So our report in Appendix C shows the membership of the plan. The TAP is that two-thirds of the liabilities in the TAP are in respect of the retirees, and there are about 770 retirees in the TAP. The other components are terminated members and transferred members. There are 346 terminated members and almost 100 transferred members. And of course, there's no active members because all of the agencies are terminated.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then at one point, and I'm sure it's a policy issue, and this is not an indictment, I'm just asking a question. At one point, do we recognize that maybe we are a little fat, and maybe we can throw some more funds to not just the underfunded folks, but all the folks?
To use the surplus for other purposes?
No.
Is that the, sorry?
Yeah, use the surplus to give the members of the TAP more than... I would like to make the members that are not receiving their full retirement, I would like to make them whole, whether it be East San Gabriel or Loyalton or these other four that you mentioned.
Right now, we don't have that authority. It's kind of laid out in the PEARL that the funds are supposed to support the employers going into the TAP at the time of the TAP. And right now,
as I think about it, as I thought about the question I asked, I can see the danger in allowing that to happen because more cities would just pop smoke.
yeah, so I mean, another point is we also need to think about.
We can strike that question.
Okay.
Strike it from the record.
No, Scott will answer.
Right, you think about it, it's getting paid down slowly, but as Ms. Brown noted, the funded percent is coming down year after year, and as more plans are coming in, as if we have additional plans that terminate, we will anticipate that funded status dropping continually down closer to what Julian mentioned as ideally around 105%. We'll see. At that point, there's not much of a buffer there. You think about it, we don't get additional contributions coming in, and so we want to have somewhat of a buffer for members who are in this plan and have gotten terminated because we have no recourse to go to the employers. So, you see that 197, and it looks like it's a large amount, but in reality, it's an amount that's decreasing. You can look at the last several years. It's slowly coming down. We anticipate that it will continue that way, and we wouldn't want to be in the position of I want to say, redistributing those monies elsewhere and then finding ourselves short a couple of years down the road.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, President Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. I don't have any substantive question. It's just one observation I noticed on one of your overheads, on 5 of 8, attachment 2, where you make reference to the unfunded accrued liability, and then you show brackets of $142 million in 2017.
Right, so that's a negative.
Negative, I know that.
Right. So
most people won't pick that up. They just look at unfunded. It's not unfunded, but I understand the math. So you may want to put an asterisk on that and indicate that it's an excess as an unfunded.
Okay, we'll be happy to update the slides and the report next year for that. Thank you for that observation.
Okay, Ms. Milton.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. I want to follow up on Mr. Perez's question. And just for clarification, my understanding is this is a restricted account. The funds in this account cannot be used for anything other than to pay the pension obligations for those employees that work for terminated agencies. Is that correct?
I mean, my understanding that is that the TAP fund is a segment of the PERF. So and has been designated to pay those the benefits for terminated members.
Designated in what fashion?
This is probably more of a legal question than an actuarial question.
It is, but those funds are set aside to cover the obligations of those specific employers. When the employer does terminate, we take the assets allocated to those employers and we pool it in the terminated agency, the pool, and those assets are dedicated to paying for the benefits for those members in the terminated agency pool and not any additional members.
What I'm trying to get at is, did we as a board make that decision to restrict those funds in the way that they are now designated, or is the Public Employees Relations Law what is restricting these funds?
It's the law.
Okay.
There is a provision where if an agency terminates, that it can be considered to be placed into the TAP even if there is not they're not able to pay their termination fee, but that requires a determination by the chief actuary that that will not negatively affect the TAP, which is virtually impossible for him to make. So there is that, but basically that's the way the Pearl sets it up.
And that's what I thought it was. Last question, I believe. Have we faced any allegations from agencies that are terminating that the fees that we are charging them for termination are excessive?
Yeah, I personally don't like the term termination fee, and I'm not sure exactly how that emerged over time.
I'm happy to substitute another term, but
thank you. When we do a termination valuation, we use a much lower discount rate because we know the liabilities are going to be put into the TAP, and the assets supporting the TAP is this dedicated immunized portfolio of government bonds. So to match the expected payments from that, the underlying discount rate for the valuation is much lower, and that makes the liabilities much higher. We show in each of the public agency reports our hypothetical termination liability in the event that an agency terminates. So the funded, so that additional payment which they need is just to bring the funded status up to match the lower discount rate used. So it's not a fee which is a processing or a handling fee in that sense.
Right.
It's an amount to make the liabilities and the assets match going into the pool.
And I appreciate that's a tough decision and calculation you have to make, because once we accept that termination and receive that fee, that's the last fee we're going to receive.
That's right, and that's why we have to be particularly conservative. And each valuation, we look at the demographics of the terminating plan, and we look at the duration of the liability and select an appropriate discount rate based on the then existing Treasury bond rates at the time. So we're very market sensitive, and we want to do our best, the best job to protect, number one, the system, and also give a fair deal to the agency who's terminating.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Saha, could you hit your button there so I can get you up here? There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a quick question. I'm sure you've probably done some research on when you expect the fund to go down to the 105%.
Well, that's kind of based on speculation.
Right, right.
So, no, we don't have anything in the actuarial office where we project when plans are going to terminate in the future. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious if you'd done any modeling or forecasting on.
No, I mean, I think we mentioned in the agenda item that if an agency terminated with a liability of $50 million, what the impact would be on the thing. But we don't have any notion of which agencies are may terminate or not terminate. That's beyond the scope of the work that we do.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm seeing no more requests to speak, so I think that wraps that item. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, on to 7B, Pension Modeling Tool, Pension Navigator, Mr. Turando and team member Kerry Worgan.
Good morning. Scott Turando from the Actuarial Office. Item 7B is also an information item, and this item is think about it, it's a demonstration of a pension tool that the Actuarial Office has developed in conjunction with the IT department. We've heard a number of employers requesting for us to help provide tools to them to kind of help them plan for their retirement contributions and do some analysis on their own. And so we went back and we looked at what we could do, and with that, we've come up with this tool. It enables the stakeholders to kind of generate contributions and projected status on a number of scenarios, and it gives the employers some budgeting information as well. Kerry Worgan is supervising actuary in the office, and he's going to step through and show a demonstration of what the tool can do.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, committee and board members. Kerry Worgan, actuarial team. And I have the pleasure today of introducing you to Pension Navigator. You may have heard this referred to in the past as Vital Signs. It's kind of our working name. And it was a good collaboration between the actuarial office and Tim Taylor's group, the enterprise division. And it was a fun project, I have to say. And it is ongoing. So this is version 1. Keep in mind that we are continuing to make improvements and enhancements as agencies and board members are requesting more useful information. So, all right, this plan was developed to assist our agencies in projecting costs and for planning and budgeting purposes. Let's start with our pension fundamentals. So the key measure, basic measure we have to view the current health of a pension system is the funded status. So effectively, if the funded status is less than 100%, means that our assets aren't sufficient to meet the obligations. Our current funded status is around 70%, but we know that that's today and we have to move forward. So our current funded status, as you know, is 100% and will always be 100%. As actuaries, we view the danger zone, if you will, as less than 50%. We view anything from 60 to 80 to 90% as sort of our caution warning zone. And we would feel much more comfortable at a 90 or 100%, or look at the TAP at 197%. That gives us much more comfort that those benefits are going to be paid. So this tool sits on our valuation system. So what we have here is a baseline based on all the valuation results for every plan that just went out June 30th, 2018. Gives us the position on that date. But we know that there's a lot of factors that we have to consider going forward. Investment returns, which are the primary driver, generally they create about 80 to 90% of our experience gains and losses. So they're the big driver of costs. Member demographics, including salary growth, mortality rates, retirement rates. We have benefit provisions that we need to worry about in terms of PEPRA, transition from classic to PEPRA. And we have a lot of actuarial assumptions and methods that are in place as well. Discount rate being the key one, currently at 7%. Our inflation rate also drives some of these costs at 2.5%. And our amortization policy that we just recently introduced and will be fully effective with the next valuation, where we've lowered the amort period down to 20 years. And of course, actual experience. We can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but we scan forward. We're looking out on the horizon to see what's coming, and we adjust. And that's the key here. It's the path forward we're worried about. Looking into the future, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years, it's the path forward that matters here. So let's give you an analogy, and one I like to use for all my agencies is, say you're making a long sailing voyage from San Francisco to Hawaii. You would chart a direct course, straight line. Okay, we know, and that would be our baseline. Okay, we know that with headwinds and tailwinds, potential storms, we're going to get knocked off our course. We could be a little ahead of pace, we could be behind pace, but we still know where our target is, and we adjust. Okay? Hence the navigation tool. We are navigating towards this end goal of 100%. So let's start off with the employer view. Because there are two views under Pension Navigator, the employer view is what we propose to send out to the agencies and let them have access to. So how does it check the current financial health of their plan? Well, we do projections of accrued liabilities. So we take their current accrued liability, we add in normal cost, we make benefit payments out, and we credit interest as we project those liabilities into the future. We do the same thing with the assets. Again, we look at employer contributions coming in, employee contributions coming in, benefit payments going out, and assumed investment returns. We compare those two, and that gives us the unfunded liability. So 1 less 2, liability less plan assets, gives us the unfunded liability. The fourth one is the projection of the funded ratio. So we're taking assets divided by liabilities to say what is the current funded status. And then finally, the key one is projecting employer rates and contributions. Obviously, those amounts are needed to fund normal costs going forward, but also to pay off the unfunded liability. So there's not just the current position we're worried about, we are worried about the path forward. So we had incorporated some stress tests that the employers and the agencies, finance directors can use to test for budgeting purposes going forward. We know there's investment return volatility. Good years where we earn more than 7% and bad years where we earn less than the 7%. We also are concerned about potential discount rate changes. And they may be curious to know, if PERS was to drop the discount rate, how does that affect my budget? Finally, there's some tools that the employers have in terms of additional discretionary payments or ADPs, or if they're making contributions to a Section 115 trust in terms of stabilizing their budgets. And then finally, we built in a budgetary impact for the tool that they can actually take all this information and produce budgets for themselves based on the next 5 to 7 years. So again, this is a key aid, and we talked to a lot of our agencies about the tool and being able to model some of the stuff. The finance directors and city managers like to know where they're headed within the next 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. They want to know what the annual changes in their funding requirement may be. They also want to be able to see the impact of potential ADPs that they might want to make in terms of, does that lower my cost short-term, long-term? And also they want to make sure if they need to make provision for, steep increases that we know are coming, how much money do I need to set aside maybe in a 115 trust to meet those contributions? So, saying that, let's have a quick look through. We'll give you a live demo. Hopefully things will work here. Well, actually going to start off with the first thing you'll see when they open up the model is this disclaimer. And we want to make sure that they're aware that these are projections, forecasts looking far into the future, and it's stuff that they're inputting into the system. Their conjecture on what could happen may not mirror what we as actuaries may put into the system as what could happen. So we just want to make sure when they're opening the system, they understand what they're agreeing and accepting in terms of these are projections. These are not things that we're actually telling them are going to happen. These are just possible horizons. So they'll get that disclaimer when they open it up. All right, so let's pull up an employer at random. Right now we've got this preloaded for all our non-pooled plans in version 1. The expectation is that we will continue to work and build it in for our pooled plans in the future in version 2 or version 3 as we go along. But let's start off with a non-pool plan. I'm going to start with City of Orange. And they have the ability to open up their miscellaneous or safety plan. And we'll look at their miscellaneous plan. All right, and when you open it up, this is what they'll see. Effectively, the red line is their contribution rate. And you can see for the next 30 years, obviously it's going up initially as we climb those amortization ramps. And then it plateaus, and then it starts to fall off as bases start to fall off as they get paid off. And the impact of PEPRA, because we know that the PEPRA costs are slowly decreasing as they transition from Classic to PEPRA members. The blue line you can see there is the funded status. And again, that's for this plan, they're at 71.2 on the valuation date. And if we earn 7% every year, you'll see that they make slow and steady progress as they climb the curves up to 100%. Now, there's a lot of information on here for them. And some of the assumptions, and maybe I'll walk through some of the assumptions that they can use. You can see, starting on the top left, you can see they can project 10, 20, or 30 years, again, depending on what their horizon is that they're looking out. We allow them to turn PEPRA on and off. So we get a lot of questions of what are the savings of the system due to PEPRA? And we have the ability now to do some estimates on actual savings due to PEPRA under not only an individual plan, but the whole system. So we can transition, and they have a choice to transition over 10, 15, or 20 years. Typically, we see about a 5%, 6% a year turnover through PEPRA. And if that's to continue, our expectation is about 15 or so years that most of the people in the system will be PEPRA members at that time. Now, we're seeing slightly slower turnover in the safety plan, so they may want to transition to 20 years when they're looking at their safety plans through this tool. I also have some plans that are over 50% already into PEPRA. So they may want to say, no, we're seeing much quicker turnover in our agency or in our system, so I'm going to use 10 years to do the projection. We've also introduced an additional discretionary payment field so they can access, if they say, I'm going to put extra money into my plan, I just click on the yes and I'll be able to define how much I can put in and how many years I'd like to do that for. Finally, there's a random investment scenario. What we've done here is we've pulled in all the most of the simulations that we ran for the 2017 ALM workshop, and they're randomly picking a scenario that, because we know that we're not going to earn 7% obviously every year. There's going to be ups and downs, and that better reflects what we expect the funded status and contributions to be. If they don't want to introduce a random scenario, they can actually choose in the far right column a specific rate or a series of rates. Okay, we've built it in at 7 as our baseline, but they can choose any rate that they want or any combination of rates for the next 30 years to do their projections. And I'll walk through some scenarios that I think a lot of our finance directors are considering. Okay, looking down the right side of here, you'll see that we've got some funded status information, the current, a year projected into the future, and then for the next 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years, we show the funded status. And then on the employer rates, which is, I think, their main concern, obviously, is the current fiscal year, which is based on the 17 valuation, the projected for the next fiscal year, which is based on the valuations we just did, 6/30/18. And then we also show for the period that they choose the average rate and the maximum rate, because they know where they are today, but how high is that going to go? So that's a key field. And then finally, we also show them the cost over the period that they choose, in this case 10 years. This agency is going to pay $300 million into their fund. So when we can look at that figure, the 300 million, and say, if we change our investment returns, if we change our discount rate, how much does that impact the overall cost of that plan? Okay, so everything is done in comparison to the baseline, which is what we provide from the actuarial office. But let's do a quick calc here and say, well, we know that we actually earned 6.7. In 18-19. So let's submit that as an updated return. And we wait. All right, and you can see that although on this graph it didn't change a whole lot, and we don't expect it to change a whole lot, you can see that the rate slightly increases and that the overall cost, that 1 year 6.7 has added 1.63 million in terms of the cost for the next 30 years. All right. In addition, under here, we also provide them with a look at their assets and liabilities if they want to compare the modeling of the assets and liabilities, again, over the period they choose. And then again, there's our budget tab, and I'll get back to that slightly, that they can look at some of the budgeting. So that's our plan A, if you will. A city director can say, here's our expected cost at this point based on, again, investment returns only. We don't know the demographics yet for 18-19. But let's go back, play with our modeling a little bit and say, what if a random return was generated? So here we click on random. We want to generate a new random scenario, and we've given them the ability to pick a percentile. We want to say a low random investment return, a low moderate, a higher moderate, and then a very good, obviously, random return. Most of our finance directors are going to be concerned with the low ball, so they're going to throw a 25 to 50 or even a 0 to 25 to say, you know, how bad could rates possibly get? So we click on submit. We run our random scenario. And this gives us a much better indication of what we believe is going to happen in terms of volatility. So you can see there, slide this guy down a little bit. Come on. Oh, it's not going to move down, but obviously you can see under this scenario, rates jump up quite a bit. We've got some poor investment returns in the short term. We have a good investment return, obviously looks about 10 years into the future, where rates drop. So again, we get some of that volatility that we expect. We don't assume a nice smooth line. We expect jagged ups and downs in terms of both rates and funded status. We just don't know exactly when and where those jagged lines are going to happen. Okay, so that's a random. Let's go back. And again, we see Plan A, which was based on the 6.7. But maybe that agency is more concerned with sort of the downside risk. And they are proposing that what happens if we only earn, let's say, 6% for the next 5 years? So they're more worried about downside risk. So they put in 5 years. Oh, we got a 9 in there. Let's put a 1 in here. So they might call their plan B. You know, we know plan A is what CalPERS is telling us, but we want to protect it a little bit on the downside. We think that the rates might be a little bit lower. And again, you get a nice graph of the slightly higher contribution rates going forward, the drop in the funded status because we've got lower returns for the next 5 years. It means when you look at the diagnostics here, it adds about 10% to their overall cost over the next 30 years. And you can see that the average contribution rate is now up to 28.93, so that's an increase of 2.6%. And the new maximum is now at 45.84, which is up almost 2% from the prior maximum. So again, they have some idea of what this could do to our budgets looking forward. And again, that's the key, is everyone should be looking forward into their planning. So at this point, they would probably want to go and say, that's our plan B. Let's look at our budget. So all the information that we see there is downloadable into an Excel spreadsheet. So they can take that information for both of their plans. You'll see there's a miscellaneous plan, a safety plan, and a combined plan. And they can download this information and develop their own presentations for City Council. The information is all there. They can see the impact not only on an annual increase in contribution rates, but also relative increase. So you can see, for example, under this plan, we're seeing under our baseline 9.36% and the 7.4%. With the new scenarios, obviously because there's the 2-year lag, the 9%, 7%, and then 6%, you start to get these increases as we ramp into these investment losses. Okay, so that's their plan B. Let's take a quick look if we said, what if we changed our discount rate? So let's go over to the discount rate. Let's make this a 6.75, not 7.75, 6.75. We're also going to change our investment returns because we should be consistent. All right, so let's go back here and we'll pull up our funded ratio. Oh yeah, they can also toggle on and off different basis if they want to see the comparisons. So let's go back to the summary here. Okay, so this is if we were to drop the discount rate to 6.75. Plan C for this agency, they want to know what is the impact. What does that do to my maximum rate? And my new maximum rate would go up to 49, 4.86 over the baseline. The average over 30 years is now 28.98, an increase of 2.65 over the baseline. So they have some measures, some metrics to compare the impacts of potential changes under the system to what their current baseline would be. And again, they could bounce into their budget tool, take that information and have their plan C for presentation purposes. And then finally, we talked a little bit about the additional discretionary payment. We can reset our modeling. They say, what if we want to make an additional payment? It shows them what 1% of the UAL is for their plan at the moment. For this plan, it's about $1 million. So let's go and put $2 million and see what kind of an impact that makes. And let's do that over, say, 3 years. They have a plan to pay down some of that UAL. We submit that. And again, you can see that now the contribution rate has dropped as we expect. The funding status has improved. And that's saving them, in this case, $7.5 million over the next 30 years. So again, they get some instant feedback over potential, and they may call that Plan D, right? They want to take some of that extra money, put it in the plan, or put it in a 115 trust. How does that impact our contributions going forward? Okay. Any questions on the employer view?
So yes, I want to thank you for the presentation. I have several questions. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. Can we go back to the original City of Orange?
The original city, sure.
So for those of us who've worked in budgets our whole career, public agencies live and die by their budget assumptions. You can have either inexperienced or people who have rose-colored glasses on and project some really good numbers and to make their numbers look great and almost mislead their city council or their school board or whoever. So I have concerns about that. I love this, that they can put this in, but I'm hoping that when we give this to the employers, is that we kind of give them an idea of what the budget assumptions should be. Like we have assumptions of what that PERF is going to return over the next 10 years, right? We know it's going to be less than 7, and then we know it's going to be, for the next 30, it's going to be greater than 7. And so maybe we could start with helping these agencies with what we think are the baseline budget assumptions so that they're not being too rosy in their expectations and then the cities get excited. I don't know, I'm just a little help, because otherwise you could end up with too rosy a situation. Just like PEPRA, do you give them trend lines, or are they tracking the trend lines of how many of their employees are in PEPRA? And it also depends which employees, right? If it's all the low-paid employees that are in PEPRA, that, even if it's 50%, but if it's all the new workers that come in at a lower rate of pay, it will skew that number as well. So just wondering how we're going to help agencies and train them, because not all budget managers and city managers are created equal, as you've probably learned, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
That's a great question. We do spend a lot of time with finance directors. They've requested us on a regular basis a tool that they can use to kind of do some more projections. There are limitations, obviously, and that's why we want to make sure that disclaimer is there, because, as you said, if you're putting in bad assumptions, you're going to get some bad results. We do provide the baseline, and that's our projection from the valuation reports, but we also want to educate them and use this as an educational tool to see the impacts of, what if we put in a 6.1 CMA for 10 years? What does that do to projected funding? That might be your plan B. Or, and I've talked to agencies already that have looked at this tool a little bit, and they're saying, well, maybe I want to put in a 5% as my plan C. So all they're trying to do is educate both their city council and their city managers as, here's a range of possible outcomes. We don't know which exact scenario we'll be on, but there's a range. And we have to be able to plan not only a baseline, but some contingencies. We need to have some reserves set aside. And a lot of agencies and cities are doing that, is put some money on contingency and into reserves for these potentials that may pop up. I think what they really want to know is, how much do I need to have in my reserve? Is it a $20 million hit in that third year and fourth year? Or is it a $10 million hit? If we had a really bad year, say I put in a -10, and all of a sudden those costs start driving up, how much of that do we need to put aside to make sure that we are able to meet the contributions of the plan? So again, we don't really know. There's a lot of talk about a recession, and then there's a lot of talk of no recession. So we're just not sure when it may happen or when it may not happen. But a lot of it is planning. And like anybody setting up a budget, you need to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and maybe some of these agencies a D and E and an F as well, as to what could happen. Because although we're only looking at one piece of their budget, that's their pension, it is a big chunk, but they've got a whole range of other issues in terms of the revenue side that we don't even see, and we don't really want to see what's going on the revenue side. But that's a very good question.
I forgot to start out by saying this is a very cool tool. Sorry, I'm a glass half empty kind of gal, probably because I've dealt with school budgets my whole career. But so I think it's very awesome. It's going to be a great planning tool. And if it's not necessarily CalPERS who's helping our local agencies with a budget assumptions, then maybe it's through their associations, like maybe League of Cities or the county consortiums or something like that. But I just wouldn't want them to, I would just make sure that we maybe say, don't be overly aggressive with your assumptions because you could end up in much bigger trouble. I just don't want them to mislead anybody, but I think this is a very great tool for planning, especially for cities who are looking at making some one-time payments, and how will that help, and to convince maybe their city council to put the money into to pay off the unfunded liability. I think that's great. So, good job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Outstanding. This is I wish I had this when I was CFO. Like you said, it's just one piece of the puzzle for developing a budget, but it's a big piece, and it's a complicated piece that I think this tool is going to be very helpful in the path forward, as you mentioned, because school districts are now even required to have multi-year planning strategies adopted by the board, so this tool fits in right with that requirement. On the disclaimer, though, how is there a way that is communicated to the policy board or the city council? Because Ms. Brown is right that depending on what your goal is, you may start using unrealistic numbers, and the first response is, oh, that's CalPERS number. So is there a way to communicate to the policymakers when they use this tool? Because, oh, by the way, they will be able to use a similar tool with their governing body, just like you did with us? They will be able to do that?
Yeah, they'll have access through my CalPERS.
Right, and so they'll be able to present that. So somehow, if we could just require that the governing body understands that when those numbers change, that it's an internal number. I don't know how you do that, but I think it's important that the governing body understands that, because otherwise it's going to be CalPERS told me.
It's a good point. We may be able to put additional language into the disclaimer.
Okay.
That says that, the default scenarios come directly from the valuation reports for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you run your own scenarios, that you're responsible.
Yeah, something like that.
But we might be able to put something in the disclaimer.
Just nudge them so that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you to just comment on is that the funded status, because it comes through very clear with this tool that you don't need. It's 71% funded doesn't mean that you need 100% today.
Correct.
Because you're talking about 30 years later. So could you expand on that so people understand that we got 1.9 million members and we have 600,000 retirees, and you need 100% for those 600,000 today, but the person that just started to work today, we don't need the funded status for that person until 40 years from now. So it's the long term.
And that's why I use the analogy of the long voyage, because it is a 30-year path, or longer, right? We have people that join the system today. We expect they'll get benefits 60 years from now. So it's beyond 30 years. We kind of have a 30-year mindset. Yes. But we've also heard that agencies are worried about the next 5 years as well. So it's the whole path forward. It's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 20. They want to make sure, but at least with the tool, they have an idea of saying, okay, we can follow that contribution line. When does it start to come down for us? Right? We have 8 years of high rates, and then it slowly, the pepper starts to kick in, and we can afford the stuff after 8 years, but we really have to focus on the next 8 to get through that period. And if there's a shock to the system, if we have a bad investment return, how much higher does that go? So funded status is important. Obviously, at 70% today, roughly, I'd feel more comfortable if it was at 80%, even better if it was 90, but it's a lot better than 60. Right. One advantage of this tool is we can run the whole system and say, what if we had left it at 7.5, right? We've dropped the discount rate from 7.5 to 7. How much does that hurt the funded status? Mm-hmm. And we'd be up over 75% if we'd stayed at 7.5. Sure. So it's just an ongoing, long trip that we're slowly navigating through, this tool allows them at least to project at their level what their cost would be, and that they're making progress on their funded status. I think that's the key, is that people kind of want to know, when do these rates come down? When does my funded status get to 80 or 90? So, and now they have some actual information and an analytical tool that allows them to do some what-if stuff. So.
Well, again, I just want to applaud you for your vision and your foresight to come up with this tool that's not going to only help the individual agencies, but also help CalPERS
exactly
manage better. So I appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the tool. I'm really impressed with it. I had a question. I think Henry was asking the question, but I'm not sure. So this live demo that you're doing, I assume if they bring a computer in and hook it up to their screen, they can do this in front of their members and their board and stuff, right?
I would assume they can do that, yeah. They have access to my CalPERS.
They can actually do it live if the board asks for them to, hey, I don't trust your figures that you're saying. Hey, bring this tool in so we can all see.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because anyone on the board could say, well, hypothetically, what if we only earned 5?
Right. Oh, well, then let me pull this up and I'll show you.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Perez.
Strong work, guys. Thank you. You asked if this was for the employer side. Is there going to be an employee piece to this? Because I have a couple questions on employee piece.
On the employee side, no, I don't think we have. I mean, my guess is that if the agencies wanted to show the employees, do groups, call in the employees and say, here's the plan, here's the path we're on, they could demonstrate some of the stuff for them. But the employees' obligations are to make their contribution, whatever that may be if they're Pepper Classic.
Sure. I was hoping for something that the labor groups could use to do the same thing. So when CalPERS...
Go ahead.
Well, like Kerry mentioned, there's an employer view. This is the employer view. There's also what we call, say, a board view for that looks at the perf overall instead of the specific rate plans, and that just gives a view of basically running through these type of scenarios at the perf level. And then I think the eventual goal will be we are going to be rolling this out in stages. The goal is to roll it out to the Insight tool and have it available to board members in the next couple weeks. By Ed Forum, have it available to employers. And I think the eventual goal is to have it available on our website so anyone can run it, employer, employees as well. Because as you mentioned, the employees will be interested in running this analysis as well. You'll have a number of stakeholders that want to run scenarios as well. So the goal will be to have this out there available. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of this information's in the annual valuation reports, and charts and tables in the back of the report that no one ever reads, but it's there. And this just kind of makes it a little bit more available to people, and it's a little bit more interesting seeing colored graphs instead of reading a report.
Right. Then with the direction, or with Ms. Taylor's consent, then that's a goal, but I would like to see
no. When I say it's a goal, is that's
going to happen?
Yes. Okay. I mean, it's just a matter of getting everything implemented.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify. So the goal is to have this out on the Insight tool, and we can look at employee contributions? Is that what you're asking?
I want the employees to be able to log on wherever.
He wants the employee to be able to do what we just did.
So when they sign into their My CalPERS, is that what you're saying?
As an employee group, as an employer group, like negotiations.
Yes.
So you're saying labor groups can sign on?
Yes. Correct.
Okay.
And not even to sign on, it'll be available on the CalPERS web.
That's our job, to keep the city honest, or the organization honest.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be, if you can think about it, it wouldn't be fair to give to the employers and not
right.
labor
okay.
groups.
So they're going to get a sign on.
Or just any stakeholders in general. So the plan is to make it available to everyone.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
So if we're going to make it available to everybody, is there a way to, oh man, I know this will take a lot of work, but maybe you guys already have it. So for Orange, you have miscellaneous and safety. And let's say I'm a negotiator for miscellaneous. Am I able to go in and say, okay, for miscellaneous, I'm going to give this class of an employee a 5% bump, and this class of an employee a 2% bump, and what's my cost going to be for that?
That's definitely not in version 1. It may not show up until version 3 or 4, but it gets back into our evaluation system to be able to drill down into these different groups, and that's the problem we have. You'll see that the assumptions we allow you to play with right now is just discount rate, but things like payroll and inflation, we're hoping to get into version 2 based on some of the sensitivity work we do, but it gets a little more complicated to start drilling down into specific groups to say, hey, these guys are going to get a 4% pay increase. What is that going to do to my accrued liability? But
that would be helpful to both sides.
Yes.
Because
well, yeah,
just facts, just strictly factual numbers, and then.
Right. Well, part of the goal is as we roll it out to employers and individuals, we'll get their feedback and suggestions. And as Carrie mentioned, this isn't ongoing. It's not like it comes out and then we don't change it. That we say enhancements, additional changes as we go forward. So any suggestions, comments, or changes, we'll take and we'll process them and see if we can include those in future versions.
I think this kind of information would streamline negotiations for both sides.
Maybe.
Will it, so in version 6.3, whatever, will that include the employee contribution?
You mean in terms of cost sharing, things like that? Again, there's things that we can put on the table in terms of what possible enhancements can we make and how can we do it effectively, given that there's 3,000 plans out there. I think that's the challenge.
I know it's a lot of work, but you guys open the Pandora's box. And is there a way for the employee, for everybody then, to show, maybe do some free marketing for us to show what the pre-funded trust would be if we were to put money into the pre-funded trust as opposed to paying it down? Could we do another line saying, hey, if you guys did this and that met this kind of return, what would that look like?
I think that's a possibility. Again, there's all kinds of enhancements that we can make to the system, and we've started with the ADP because it goes directly into the plan. The 115 trust we know sits outside the plan, and those are assets that they can use to fund contributions. It's possible that we can model some of that stuff as well, and we can work with Arnita's group to incorporate some of that into the model as well. But again, version 2 or 3.
And then to answer the earlier questions, when the system spits out the plan, ABC, whatever, can we always have a default that there'll always be the actual PERS numbers first, and then their plans?
Yeah, when they open up the tool, it defaults to our baseline, and when you reset anything, it defaults back to baseline. So the baseline is always there, and again, we keep reinforcing that the baseline is our best expectation based on the valuation report, and that's our plan A.
Yeah, but you guys are the best, so that's the numbers that we want. So even when they spit out the numbers for the spreadsheets for their presentations, if we can make them get that information, and then they have to make a conscious choice to say, we're not going to.
It's already on the budget tool right now. The baseline's always there. So they'll see the baseline numbers and then the scenario that they've chosen. So they'll always, from the budget page, get the comparison. So everything is kind of compared to both baseline and whatever they've modeled.
Perfect, thank you. And then lastly, maybe on each of those little spreadsheets that they spit out, we can do that disclaimer, that warning.
That's a good point. Definitely, when we download the information, we want to make sure that these are projections based on input that you've put into the system. The baseline is based on the valuation reports as of 6/30/18. That would be a good point to do for the download.
I never would have thought that this kind of stuff makes me excited. But you boys did a good job. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Ms. Paquin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a wonderful tool, and I think it's going to be so useful for a lot of different groups. And I do like the concept of putting the disclaimer on the Excel sheet when you have out the results. And I'm just curious, I know that this hasn't been broadly released to employers, but did you have a core group that was helping you test this along the way?
We did. We introduced 10 agencies with working with the League of Cities. We sat down, did the demo, listened to their feedback, listened to things that they requested, that a lot from the budgeting side, actually, that they wanted to see a lot more. We had provided, I think, 5 years initially. They wanted to go at least 7, so whatever ramps were in place were fully vetted, and took a lot of their feedback. It was a good discussion, and a lot of the things that they introduced have been reflected as part of the, I'm not going to say it's the final, but it's final version 1. But again, we're always listening, and we want to know what more can we do to make this a better tool. So we're looking for enhancements, both from agencies and yourselves as board members, is what more do you want to see from this? What kind of metrics are you concerned about? What kind of planning should we, help you do?
And I appreciate the back and forth and the feedback and your willingness to incorporate that. And I'm just curious, going forward, will there be a formal process for users to give you feedback, or are you just expecting them to email you, call you?
Well, we are running a session at the Ed Forum, introducing it again to all the agencies. Just as a caution, it's only available right now to non-pool plans, so we're already getting some pushback from these pooled agencies that, we want to have a tool as well. So we are still working on getting a possible pooled version of this plan. We will do some demonstrations. We will also be encouraging them to give us feedback, if they want to see more information, enhancements. Fine-tune things. I mean, we've given them certain parameters. You'll notice that the discount rate goes from 6 to 8%, and we feel comfortable showing those kind of ranges. But the PEPRA, maybe they want to lower the PEPRA or make it a number that they want to introduce. Maybe they want to use 12 years. Things like that we can possibly change and incorporate. We're willing to work with them to make this, again, a better tool for everybody to use.
And last question is, will you have the capability to track which agencies are actually using this tool? And I ask that because if you start to see that maybe there's a group that someplace is not using it, would you consider doing outreach to them and explaining what they could benefit by using this?
It's a good question. I don't think we're actually tracking who's going to be using it. My expectation is that we'd probably, and we always encourage, as actuaries, we encourage our finance directors to reach out to us at least once a year to talk about what's going on. This is another tool that we can say, hey, if you have any questions using the tool, you can reach out to us and we can help you and do some planning. Make sure that you are putting reasonable scenarios in play. And have some more of a dialogue around, the path forward, because ultimately that's our concern, is to make the system sustainable. Is the path forward, are you guys going to run into issues and troubles? You need to know sooner rather than later. So I think anything that we can do to encourage some dialogue with our agencies is a good thing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay, thank you. Again, this is a fabulous tool. I wish we had it every year that we've done budgets. So I know that in every city this is going to be enthusiastically appreciated. Couple of questions. You're going to roll this out at the Educational Forum in October to all of the cities. We won't have absolutely everyone there. Is it live now? Or is there a date you're going to turn this on to any city?
You can see that it's still in a test environment, so we are still doing a little bit of testing. There's still some little bugs and tweaks that we're trying to make sure it's 100% solid by the time it goes out in October. As Scott said, there is an insight version, the board view of this, that we expect is probably going to be ready in a week or two. And you guys will be able to play with it and look at some of the numbers. Not only can you look at any plan, but you can look at any of the state plans, or schools that are the big plans. So the expectation, again, is to make it available once it's fully vetted and checked and 100% ready for, and again, we think comfortably that we can reach the Ed Forum and have this ready to go.
So we're looking at in the next week or so that those of us on the board will have an opportunity to go live with it. Is it approximately November 1 that all of the municipalities will have it? Is that reasonable?
I think that's the goal. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to applaud you for making a decision to post this to the website, which is, if my understanding it correctly, anyone then would be able to go to the website, plug in a city, and start coming up with a calculation.
Yeah.
And that includes all of the media, all of the labor organizations, everyone.
For better or for worse.
You know, if we can get agreement as to what the actual numbers are, it makes all of the other discussions go so much easier. So I think this is a fabulous tool. When do you expect to be live on the website?
I don't have a firm date on that.
Okay.
I think it really depends on how quickly we can get it finalized. As you can see, it's test environment. It's taking a little bit longer than we would prefer it to take. Once we get the speed up, we want to give it out to the employers, roll it out to them, and then very soon afterwards, make it available to everyone at that point.
Yeah. And Ms. Middleton, one of the factors that we would look at is what's the level of support needed from the actuaries to support the employers and others who are using it sooner. And then once they have a good handle on that, that would then determine the rollout.
That makes perfect sense. How much time and work has gone into doing this?
Well, it's an interesting story because this started with one question from an agency probably about 9 years ago now. And a good friend from Newport Beach asked, you know, what's the projected UAL in 30 years? So that kind of started the ball rolling, and then projecting 30 years for an agency and other questions that evolved. So it has a spreadsheet has evolved over basically the last 9 years. This model itself was then put together over a couple weekends to take all that information and blow it up for the whole system, which is, I think, the key is to be able to model the whole perf. And you'll see that in the board view is that we can now model the whole system, see the impacts. But so there's a bunch of time, but it's little bits and pieces along the way based on questions from the agencies.
All right. I have one question. I see on the report, cost over 30 years. Does the report break down those costs for each year so that if I'm looking at, I'm going to be out $300 million over the course of the next 30 years, can I track how much money each year you are projecting to be due?
That's a good question. I mean, all those numbers are there, and within the budget, you can see the next 7. But I think when I was talking to Tim's crew, is that they could download all 30 years when they're doing the download, so you get year by year for the next 30 years for both plans.
I know from a budgetary standpoint, that's the data that we're going to be looking at, and most particularly on a city council if we're trying to make a decision as to whether or not to make an additional discretionary payment. It is, what's that impact going to be, both in the near term and the long term, that is going to be probably driving that decision.
Well, that's a good comment to make, and I think we can incorporate that as part of our download.
Yeah, and like I said, when we get it out to the board view, encourage you to take a look at it, and if it's something's not there that we might be able to get before the employer version gets out, please let us know.
Last, from my colleagues, most municipalities have been spending a fair amount of money going to consultants to get the data that we're now going to be able to get here. And not only is this a tremendous tool for all of us, there's potentially some savings for all of us in terms of not requiring as much consultant work and having a much more standardized approach. So congratulations and thank you.
All right, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you. I would echo everyone's comments about how exciting this is. And I think it really shows responsiveness to our stakeholders, to everyone's needs. But I think it also, although it's going to require some support, I kind of almost view it as giving everyone access kind of to something of an expert system that can also reduce the internal need for us and for we have much more efficient, streamlined communications. This capability and sharing this with stakeholders, I think, rather than having all these one-off conversations and calculations and consultants and all this, just moves everyone a step toward having their needs met in a much more systematic, effective way. So the efficiency factor is not lost on me either. I did have a couple little things on the whole idea of the disclaimer. In my experience, the more comprehensive and bigger the disclaimer is, the more quickly, and you can track it empirically, people get to the bottom and click on it without reading it. And so I would have a couple things that have helped in projects that I've been involved in with those kind of things. One, terms and conditions, not just a disclaimer, not just an acknowledgement that I realize this is, not handed from the clouds with a loud voice and thunder. And so any terms and conditions related to reproduction or attribution, any kind of recapitulation of that with individual pieces, like the spreadsheets or something. So, and if you have more than one thing in there, so if you have a little bit about reproduction, if you have a bit about acknowledging that these are projections, acknowledging sources, whatever, that if you have your disclaimer with a couple of those little check this before you can check this, it slows people down, and then you don't have to reproduce the entire disclaimer on other pieces if all that it's important for a spreadsheet or something is the acknowledgement of the source material or whatever. So just a couple things that I'm sure you've probably already been thinking about and that legal is thinking about, but that I found helpful because they've kept me from just going, oh, click, I want to get to the good stuff. Everybody sees those on a lot of things, and more people just look, where's the box I click to get to the stuff I want to see. But again, thank you, just great stuff.
All right, thank you. Ms. Oliveras.
Thank you. This is an interesting tool. So I want to echo Mr. Miller and Ms. Packin's comments too. It would be great to have some type of disclaimer that says this is for informational purposes only, some type of active attestation, they're checking a box, and then when they're printing it out, it shows. I wondered if we could get a product roadmap, which shows the features and maybe on no more than like a quarterly basis, right? So 2019, Q4, this is what we expect, Q1 2020, especially as this goes out, again, very exciting. I think there's going to be a lot of requests for additional features and functionality, and that takes time, right? So that would help us manage expectations and costs and understand what resources are needed going forward.
Good. Thanks. Good comments.
All right. Seeing no other requests to speak, let's move on. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's move on, Mr. Cohen, to a summary of committee direction.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Two items. First is providing on the Social Security fee some follow-up analysis on the nexus, and the second, from the conversation we just had, the most immediate work will be on the disclaimer kind of discussion, and then obviously there's lots of long-term changes we'll be looking at, and we'll certainly keep the board informed on the tool and look forward to your feedback as you are out there talking to your stakeholder interest groups. I'm sure you'll get a lot of feedback as well, so we'll look forward to that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I have no requests for public comment. So this committee is adjourned. Risk and audit. Anybody? Risk and audit? When do we start? 10:15. 10:15.